Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Angelo Ponzi is a fractional CMO, and his company is called Craft. He specializes in consulting, interim fractional marketing and strategy, leadership, and coaching services, prioritizing strategic and analytical approaches to marketing to foster sustainable business growth. He also helps companies better understand their competing market by researching customers, prospects, competitors, and the marketplace. His approach is to help folks better understand the marketplace. They compete in by researching customers, competitors, and the marketplace, and they create a blueprint and a revenue plan for those clients. And he manages to oversees all that to maximum benefit. And some of you who are regular listeners, and most of you who are regular listeners, are going to say, wait, Corey, I thought this was a Deals podcast. Why are you having a marketing guy on? I thought you always talk about that organic growth and is on the marketing side. Well, we don't have any marketing person on. Angelo has a particular experience in the M&A space as it relates to marketing and helping companies grow in anticipation of M&A on both sides. So that is why he's on, and I'm excited to have you on the podcast, Angelo.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and talk about this topic. I've actually been talking about it all week in the various meetings because I get the same question. Why is the marketing guy talking about M&A? And
I love it. So we're going to explore that. Before we answer the question, why the marketing guy is talking about M&A on the DealQuest podcast, I want to take you back to when you were maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be when you were growing up? Because my guess is it probably wasn't a marketing, a fractional CMO, probably had nothing to do with M&A, but you tell me if I'm wrong.
You are not wrong. Why? Well, I think somewhere around the age of maybe 5, 6 or so, I wanted to be Superman. Then I wanted to be a professional baseball player. And then I moved into playing music, and then I wanted to be a rock star. So I still play music. I'm not Superman, but some might say I am, but I'm not Superman. And I gave up my baseball days a long time ago.
As many of us did. Where did you grow up?
Upstate New York, and so I was a Yankee fan growing up.
Okay, all right. You see, now we got a Mets and a Yankee fan on here. There's going to be a lot of, it's all...
We could be getting some hate mail depending on where your listeners are.
Exactly. I love it. All right, now you say you still do music. What is it? Instrument you play or what?
Yeah, so I've played in bands over the years as well as just messing around. So I play currently we're called Kai and the Eclectics. So our music is very eclectic. Good. Kai actually is one of the guys where we practice, his little Yorkie, who just hangs out with us, loves to be right in the middle. Sometimes you can hear him howling along with the music, but he basically likes to sleep in the guitar cases and stuff. So we decided to name the band after him. So I'm playing bass guitar in this band.
Love it. I took a couple of guitar lessons forever ago, and it was one of those things that I didn't have a natural affinity for, and obviously didn't have the. So you said you had conversations about M&A all week. I know, when we had our pre-call, whenever it was, a month or two ago, you had come off an M&A panel, recently. So why don't we actually answer the initial question, which is, how does a marketing guy get so involved in M&A?
So there's two sides. An interesting part is I don't really change my services for either one of them. So on the acquiring side, right, they've identified the target, they're looking at the EBITDA. I come in and look at, now what happens when you acquire that company? How do you put them together? I look at culture. What's the current culture of the acquiring company and the one that's being acquired? Do they mix? How do we mix them? What's going on? Are people freaking out that they're being acquired? I've actually been acquired twice. which is another interesting story. And so I look at culture, I look at product mix, not necessarily fit because somebody's already made that decision,
Right.
but is there a cannibalization of customers or industries or markets that you're chasing? Do they help each other? Do they hurt each other? What is break it down? What's the profitability of each of these? What quadrants do they fit in? Which ones do you need to get rid of a product because it's not meeting your profitability goals? How many customers are you alienating? And already are you starting off on the wrong foot because you're doing that? So really taking that deep dive to say, this is the company we want to acquire. The EBITDA looks good. Revenues are where we want. But now what? What happens? And so that's where on the acquiring side, I've been getting involved or really kind of doing that due diligence. Again, stuff I do already, looking at the markets, talking to customers, trying to understand. And now you're dealing with two sets of customers because ultimately it's a marriage in a sense, right? You got to see how it fit and what kind of in-laws you're going to get, right? So you have to do all that stuff. And then on the flip side, I get, hey, I've got a client wants to sell their business. We've done our due diligence and they're just not ready. They want whatever 10 multiple and they're only getting a 3 or a 4. We're recommending them to continue to market and grow their revenues over the next 3 to 5 years. And can you take a look at them? Because what are they going to do differently? If it's taken them 15 years to get to here, now they want to triple it or quadruple it in 3 more years. What are you going to do differently? Where are the issues? Where are the mistakes? Where's the process issues? And really digging into internally in that. And then again, looking at the markets and trying to figure out what those growth plans can be. And then either providing them a plan. Sometimes I'm put in there to be the fractional or an interim person to help oversee that.
Yeah. And all right. So there's so many things that's interesting to me in this. I literally just got off a due diligence call on a deal and they went through the due diligence checklist, right? And we're representing the seller. It was mainly a business call, but I was on just getting a feel for what they're looking at. And obviously there is a legal due diligence and a compliance due diligence, regulatory compliance. This happens to be in a regulated space. And then they also had a list of tech due diligence, and then they had a list of HR due diligence. But they didn't, interestingly, right? They didn't have a marketing, due diligence per se. Now, granted, this is an area where it's happens to be wealth management, the buyer's wealth management firm and retirement planning, and the seller is, but still, just because you're in the same industry doesn't mean that you market the same way. And there may have been some things on the due diligence list that sort of maybe get to that, but there wasn't a separate, and I've done many, we've done hundreds, thousands of deals probably over my career. And, it's very often not a separate category, but when you think about it, I mean, how many times have we've seen it in the news? We've seen it on big M&A where customers get alienated because maybe they just have a totally different view of the buyer from minute one, not to mention maybe there's a way that buyer markets that turns off, the customers. So it's amazing that this isn't thought about more.
Yeah, well, there's even the fact that how did you go out and talk to the current customers?
Right.
Just to find that out. I had a marketing agency, a full agency, and I was acquired and by a $1 billion firm. We weren't a billion, but a $1 billion firm. But they put me together with my partner and they left us alone. We had our own brand. We had a clear delineation of anything under 25 million we could chase. Anything over, we had to turn it over to them and vice versa. Now we had access to the tools that $1 billion agency had, which made us very competitive. We grew in 8 years, literally, I say from 0 to about $28 million. Then they decided they were going to absorb us, just bring us in. So we had 25 people. They had 750 people. So right off the bat, the majority of the 25, only 3 said, we'll go. Everybody else said, no, thank you. I got kids, whatever it happens to be. And in my case, and I was the number 2 guy in the firm. My kids are little. I'm not moving. I lived where they want to move me. I don't want to live there. And within 6 to 8 months, if I can get the numbers right, the other 3 quit and every piece of business left. Why? Because of the culture we built was very different than a typical siloed agency. We kind of had this collaborative team approach where every client had a team. Where there you were dealing with individuals, again, very siloed, and our clients just didn't like it. So that was a great example. They thought they were making a great strategic move. And at the end of the day, after all that investment, they basically lost it all because they didn't mix. And so I've seen that before where companies come in and they start to they don't take the time to really understand the nuances of the product and how they fit into the market and fit with the customers. And, can the products that we have now be sold to the new customers? What kind of due diligence is being done? So how do you capitalize that? I mean, even simply in our case, right? They left us, they created another brand as opposed to bringing us in. Then when they decided to absorb that brand and make us go away, everything went away. And so, did they do due diligence on what happens if they did that? Absolutely not. They just made the decision. And I think that idea of, hey, we're big, we're strong, people will just, of course, they'd rather be with us.
Yeah. And it's interesting because they did it in a way that worked well. Like the first deal they did, right, where they let you have your own brand and kept you independent, but they had acquired, that seemed to have worked, right? Because obviously if you're keeping your brand, then they're leaving you alone, you get to run your culture, and then, right. But it's that second decision that they made. And, and it's interesting because we see that in a number of industries in that, there is this tension between so one of the things that, you want to do to get even higher multiples, bigger companies, whether they're going to get larger PE firms that go public or get acquired by even a bigger, mammoth firm, whatever it is, there's this view and there's truth in it that, hey, we want everything to be integrated and systemized and under a particular process and particular teams, because in general, industries that are much more sort of, dispersed and separated and running different don't get as higher multiples, right? Because there's this view that, we want to systemize things and be able to scale it. And then the next buyer or public, can put more capital and fuel and push this model out. Whereas if we have all this different stuff going on, but the example you gave is the downside of that, right? Was this assumption that, we can just roll everything in and get to scale. And a lot of times that doesn't work because there's a reason why it works in the model it was in. And, yeah.
Now, maybe if they had absorbed this right from the very beginning, who knows, right? But they liked what we were doing when they acquired us. And they just thought that was perfect because they were struggling, for example, in chasing business that was that below 25 million because they're a $1 billion firm. They're over, they had to have bigger clients where we didn't. And so we were kind of, again, the SWAT team where they could send stuff and make things happen. On the flip side, one of my clients is in the seasonal business, in the Christmas business, if you will. And so surprisingly, Christmas is 365 days a year when you're doing Christmas, right? But as you go into the new year in the spring, Q1, a lot of Q2, there's a cash crunch, right? Because you're taking orders, you're getting things, you're getting ready for production. And in the meantime, even though I came down with a cold last night, even though you're generating opportunities, you're getting that, 20% deposit. And that's certainly different. So and I've been working with them for 8 years now. So we always had, once we identified from a strategic standpoint that this cash flow issue is like, what do we do? We looked at things like, again, Christmas decorations, big stuff. We're like, maybe we'll go to the movie industry, right? Hallmark does movies in February. Maybe we should target Hallmark and try, so looking at all these different things. And we finally found a company that was one of our vendors under our nose the entire time and just another city. And they were year round based on the solutions they were doing. And why we did some of that in-house, we didn't have that structure of year round. It was fairly dedicated towards Christmas. So we went through that and did our due diligence. We, after, again, years, we found them and ended up acquiring them. But just bringing them in, we didn't change their name. They're separate, but they're using everything. So now they have to use our ERP system. Well, now they're in training, right? So back to the idea, it's not just brand, it's not just how you put them together, it's the technology, it's the processes, how do they work, and how do people, have issues. The funny one, when I was acquired, everybody, so they acquired me, they acquired my partners, and everybody just loved it. It actually took me 6 months to get comfortable. And yet I was the number 2 guy. It was one of my company that they bought along with my guy. And I decided he could be the president. I was the EVP, but I was the one that was most uncomfortable. I was the one that was going, what did I do? Man, what a mistake. And so it took a while. And that's back to that culture. How do we define that culture? Because now we were putting 2 cultures together And we also now had a parent company, had to worry about their culture. So we were, it took us a while to find our footing.
Yeah, and then of course, listen, when for you as an owner of your own company previously, there's that additional piece that is just not being the king or queen anymore, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But for 13 years, I just could do whatever I wanted, make those decisions. And all of a sudden, on a monthly basis, I had to do utilization reports with employees. I'd look at profitability. Somebody would call me, why is this client not generating? So now all of a sudden I had that on top of me. And, so I don't think, having been through that, every time I get in these conversations, all I hear is numbers. I hear about the numbers, and nobody ever, like you said, you're just on a call. Nobody ever brought up how you put the cultures together, the marketing, are there opportunities? What's the expansion capabilities? And this all triggered actually this kind of idea of getting into this space. It was about 2 years ago. I was brought in to help define the size of market for a company.
Yeah.
But the company was 41 years old, which already I'm puzzled. How do you not know the size of your market? Long story short, they had gotten they called it they got a poor valuation. They didn't believe it. They thought that evaluators were wrong and they were going to prove they were wrong. And so I was there to, identify and show that they had saturated the market and, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, they weren't even close.
Right. I had a feeling that was going to be the.
Yeah, they were so far off. It was incredible. So now, now how do you turn? You want to sell this business? You have to look at how do you capture more? They had something, let's say 15 companies in their pipeline. The youngest on the pipeline was 100 days. The oldest was over a year.
Wow.
So why aren't they closing? What's going on? So, I'd get into that kind of analysis to understand, what's happening with current clients. Who's in control? What happens? When you have a client, sales guy finally brings them in, you guys are servicing them. Now who's in control? Believe it or not, in this particular case, I asked somebody the question. They said, oh, that's sales. So I went to sales and they said, no, that's operations. So the operations guy, no, that's customer service. I go to the customer service. No, that's sales. And then when I'm looking at the revenues over the last 5 years, I can see them dropping because while they're servicing them and they're writing checks, nobody's paying attention to the fact that the majority of them are starting to pull back.
Yeah, it's so interesting because on the one hand, I mean, certainly one of the things that buyers do is that they look for gaps like that, right? They say, oh, the addressable market's so much bigger than these guys are capturing. We think we can leverage that, and that's our upside on the deal, right? Because nobody's going to pay for future growth that hasn't happened yet. And I'm going to tie this back into a deal structuring thing that come in, but they're not going to give you a check today for what you promise you, especially a 40-year-old company, right? Who has a track history. Why would there be any reason they're going to believe that you're suddenly going to, take off, right? So a company like that, when they realize and they're not getting the multiples they want, and they bring somebody like you in, they got really a couple of choices. One, they can run your program and improve their marketing, get more of their market for the next 3 to 5 years, and then sell. Which maybe if they have other reasons, whether it's health reasons or other things that founders are tired, whatever, that seems like a long period, right, for somebody. But that's one option. The other option is to do it for a shorter period of time, do it for a year or so, show that you're on the right track, and then structure an earnout, right? Because the problem is nobody's going to pay you. Even if you showed it for a year, they're not going to pay you for the projected growth over the next, few years. But most buyers will pay you if you hit those targets. So, there's a possibility there. You're still not going to get the full value that if you had 3 or 5 years of that actual target, money in, but there's a way you can at least share in the upside if that does happen.
And that makes a lot of sense. There, some other interesting dynamics. The two founders were in their 70s. They're retired. Right now, family members were starting to work in the business, and they were actually family, and then they didn't like each other anymore. And so you had that dynamic going on as well. And of course, they're looking at, I want to get out of this company because I'm 70 and, I want to move on. And the other thing, so back to the pipeline thing, I'm just looking at the pieces. So their sales target was a 37% increase. That was their goal for that year. And I started like in early, February 1st, something like that year. What do I know? But when I got the SOM and looking at market growth, the market was only growing 7.6%. And historically, they were only growing 6%. So they weren't doing too bad as far as market growth. They just weren't capturing enough of it. And so I was like, why the 37%? That's when I started going, there's something hinky here. And then I found out why, because they wanted to sell it.
Interesting. And listen, I've had many folks on this podcast. You read any book, any advice, whatever. It's why they, the wisdom is that you should, even if you have no plans to sell your company, like almost from day one, if you run it on the factors that make it saleable at good multiples, right? Well, that's making sure your EBIT is up, building a team, having it be less reliant on you, all these factors. You're going to be better off, one, even if you never sell, because those are best practices anyway. But two, when you get to that point, and sometimes let's face it, it's not, timing gets accelerated due to some life circumstances. You're not going to be scrambling like these folks are because they can't get the value they think they want to get out of it, right? And nobody cares. I've heard this so many times from sellers where they're like, well, I have 40 years of my life into this. Well, a buyer doesn't care if it's 40 years or 40 years. I mean, yes, there's going to legacy brand, whatever, there may be some value in that history from a legacy or marketing point of view, but from a numbers point of view, the numbers are the numbers, right? What have you done over the last 3 to 5 years, whether you're a 40-year-old company or a 5-year-old company? Nobody cares what you did 20 years ago or how long you've been doing it.
I call that, so I have a client that 75 years old. And, when I first met them, they're like, we're 75 years old. And look what all we've done. And my answer to them, I took them off guard, was like, nobody cares. It's a reason to believe, not a reason to buy.
Yeah.
Right. And because my question is, what are you going to do for me tomorrow? Right. The fact that some founder was there, 75 years ago, he's gone. But you're different people. You guys have been working together for 26 years and you're already telling me you want to retire in 3 more. So look at those dynamics. And so while it's an important leverage, it's not the thing that changes people's minds. And even in that situation, while they weren't even looking to sell, but to grow, just by doing some of the same due diligence I'm talking about. I talked to their customers. I dissected their competition. I evaluated the market growth. They're primarily here in Southern California, and understanding what was happening here. If this market's not growing, they're not going to grow. And then you got to look at competition and what kind of share they have and all that. So again, those are just best practices for me. And again, I say marketing, it's more really strategy work in the sense, because every time I say marketing, your audience is probably going, he's never once mentioned website or social media or any of those kinds, right? Because none of that matters if all this other stuff is not correct. And so whether, again, you're looking at that, if you're, looking at various targets, which is the right one and what have they done? What kind of, and I haven't even mentioned brand reputation, right? How important that is. If you got a great reputation and maybe there's been something going on with them and now all of a sudden you're acquiring a company that doesn't have as, a stellar reputation, kind of spills back on you, right? I tell clients, it takes years to build your brand and your reputation. It literally takes minutes to destroy it.
Yeah. Or in this day and age, it's probably down to seconds, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In the TikTok era, you've gone from minutes to seconds, right?
Yeah. There used to be that saying years ago, it's like a trend would start. So I'm in California. The trend would start in California. 6 months later, it'd be on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Trend starts here today. It's on the East Coast a couple, in an hour from now. It's that long.
Right. I love it. Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business, Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back for the show. Yeah, so it's interesting, obviously, having your own experience, with M&A, right? I mean, gives you a lot of perspective when advising folks. So is there anything else, sort of around that, whether it's, lessons you learned from your own experience or just from other, working with other clients that, are interesting for the audience?
You said something that's really important. And it's like pretty much the day you start your business, the day you should start preparing to sell it. I never really, in my wildest dreams, ever thought that anybody would buy me. So I did not prepare for that.
Right.
Why? Because we're a service organization, right? Clients come and go, blah, blah, blah. And what was so when this happened, it happened very quickly. We got approached, I think it was in a September of that, whatever year that was. And the deal, they wanted to close the deal in November. I pushed my portion of the deal into January so I could still get all my write-offs and stuff. But what they did is they said something to me that I thought was really interesting. And I've heard this many times now since then. We're buying you. We're buying what you did, and we want you to do it again. Versus, back to my whole premise, your clients might go, I don't want to be part of this organization anymore. And they might leave. And some of them did, actually. But that whole idea that they were buying the team for the replication, I thought was extremely interesting. But I've heard it now, since then, many times over that, yeah, we're ready to buy you, blah, blah, blah. But hey, you got to come for 2 years or 3 years, whatever it happens to be, to make sure that you stay on track. That's part of your earnout. And right. So now you got a vested interest to stay on, and which is what we had. I had a deal. My deal was the minimum of 2 years. I was there at 8 until they decided to move us. And we were doing fantastic. I got circumstances. It was many years ago, but I still to this day go, that was a dumb decision.
Yeah. And we're certainly seeing, obviously there's always this thing where the key players need to stay on for a period of time to make sure the revenue and the clients stay. But even just talent acquisition as being the main driver of deals in various industries, we're seeing a lot of these days because people have trouble finding good talent. And in fact, the talk I do called There's a Deal for That, right? Like meaning that, any kind of business frustration problem, whatever. And one of the things we talk about is if you're having trouble hiring, right? Yeah, sure. Should you continue to work with recruiters and post online and maybe give incentives to existing employees or all that organic stuff that you do to hire key people? But, if you're spending into a new geography or you're moving into a new product line, whatever it is, or sometimes it makes much more sense to acquire mainly for that talent, right? And then the stuff you're talking about integrating, at least the internal integration of culture and that kind of stuff becomes absolutely crucial, because if effectively you're buying talent, then that talent better stay for that deal to work. So we're seeing more and more of that.
Well, another quick story is, so I was at a company that was acquired.
Yeah.
Not mine, but a different company. So recruiter, 30-year-old company in the research space. And recruiter says, yeah, it'll be stock options, all the whiz bang stuff that was promising.
Yeah.
And they had a really interesting model so we had a government side and we had a commercial side. So I was brought into the commercial side.
Okay.
And about 6 months in, they sold it to a technology company that basically built satellites. And their goal was to acquire our government side in the process to help them win more business. And that was a couple of years. The CEO that was with the company, he stepped down, new CEO came in, and he calls a meeting, and there's already tension. I've already lost a bunch of people in my team because they didn't like the culture. And this guy stands up and he talks about the future. And at the end of the meeting, I raised my hand. I said, my division wasn't in any of those PowerPoints. And I watched his face curl, and it was like, holy crap, right? And he panicked, and I left the next day. There's no future. So that gets back to, I left, everybody else left. That commercial division fell apart except for the one guy that had been there for 30 years. And they just didn't think about that. They didn't think about, now I've got two sides of the house, completely different. The cultures is how these people work together in the same building, but how do they work together? How do they communicate? And you got people dropping in and, doing stuff that we're not used to. So anyway, on the flip side, there's a great culture story. The culture came in and culture didn't mix.
And it's so interesting because you think these companies, especially if it's a bigger company, they're sophisticated, they would think about this stuff. And there are so many ways that deal could have gone well. They could have, in theory, they could have only bought the government side. Now, maybe the seller didn't want to do that, right? They wanted to sell the whole thing, fine. But they, in theory, could have just bought part of it. Even if they had to buy the whole thing, you see this from bigger companies. You don't have to be a huge company to do this. They could have bought the whole thing because that's the only thing that got the deal done. The seller maybe wouldn't want, but then they could have spun off and sold the commercial side, or even sold it internally, approached you and the team to say, hey, listen, we bought this. It's not our focus, right? maybe we can spin it out to you and we'll keep an equity piece, or we'll help you get financing, or maybe even self-finance the buyout over time. And, that would make so much more sense because then they get to keep the piece they really wanted to buy, and they don't have this other thing sitting out there, and it could have been a win-win, but so it's surprising to me when there are deal options that these companies don't pursue, and they end up, and it's surprising. It's not surprising because it's not surprising because I've seen it so many times. It is surprising because I'm like, you could have done it this, you could have done that.
Yeah. Well, you've seen it thousands of times. So have I, right? Go back to my earlier case of 41-year-old company saying, we're not quite sure how big our market is. It was like, how is that possible? And I hear this all the time. And it's always amazing to me that, all businesses grow despite themselves. I mean, it just is what it is. They find a niche. I worked with a company literally a year before I got there. She was borrowing on credit cards, and she found a niche. And by the time I got there a year later, they were worth $100 million. I mean, just exploded, but they didn't know how to manage all that. That's the reason they brought me in. They didn't understand how to manage that growth. And then, of course, internally, they were adding people left and right. I was, in theory, number 50. And 8 months later, when I left, there were 300.
It's interesting because the stuff that you do, which we're talking about in M&A, whether it's on the due diligence side, on the buy side, or the increase of revenue and profit on the sell side to get the valuation you want, all of this can apply. I don't know if you've done any stuff in it, but it could apply equally to private equity investment or venture capital investment, right? If somebody, like a buyer, an investor is looking for a situation where they can, with their money, could put fuel on the fire. And obviously, if the addressable, if they've tapped out the addressable market, it's one thing. But if there is this huge additional market that maybe they haven't been able to tap because they don't have the capital, or they can't, whether it's spending on marketing directly or whether it's for hiring more team members, whatever it is. So, your work seems equally applicable in this context to even investment deals as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, to me, again, it's all, for me, it's about the data. How do you get the data? How do you use the data? How do you support making decisions? That's kind of my premise of everything that I do is I'm not going to just make it up. And I don't want you sitting in a boardroom talking to your people. I need to go out and talk to the customers. I understand the market. And regardless of what we're doing, that's where the insights come from in order to make those decisions. And so that's kind of that back to that strategy side. That's where I really focus to help companies understand. And a lot of them are impatient, as I'm sure you've experienced, right? It was a company, and I started to work with them, and we were talking about revenue goals, and it's like, okay, you've got renewable business. What percentage is that going to make up of your goal? Can we recapture something? What do you think? We put like 10%. We thought we could recapture. Well, then you got 60% of your target revenue has got to come from new business. Now let's focus on that. And, just digging into the data, it's like you're marketing in 5 vertical markets. And over the last 5 years, you've not got a single nickel out of 2 of these of the 5. Yet you're investing 40% of your budget in them.
Yeah.
Okay. So we need to rethink and understand, and how do you, close things quicker, and how do you get bigger deposits and go upstream? So, kind of doing all of that, and from a marketing and sales standpoint, and again, strategy.
And the other thing I was thinking about, especially, in your example of the 41-year-old, whatever company, it's so easy, especially if you've had success early on, right? You keep going back to the well on that. And I've heard marketers talk. Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this all the time on how companies were spending money. He was talking about this 10 years ago, right? When companies was spending still a huge amount of money on traditional media, and they didn't understand social yet. Now he's talking about social selling, all this stuff. And, that's one of the things that happens, right? Whether it affects their value in deals or just their growth, or in some cases, their ability to stay competitive. Some of them go out of business, right? Because there was a way they were successful. That's what they keep doing. And that ability to, adapt and be nimble and change is what can kill them sometimes. And why, you see these disruptions happen all the time, right?
Well, yeah. And AI is a big disruptor right now. And and it's coming fast and furious. And now we're into building agents. And whether it's, one-on-one with an agent, two agents talking together within your organization, or a decentralized of agents that are going out. And I was fortunate to spend about 6 months working on a startup, and we were immersed in that thing. As frankly, as scary as I'll get up. But with that decentralization, that my bot can talk to your bot and do commerce and make decisions, it's coming, and it's going to be a major disruptor. Absolutely. Especially when it starts to really filter into all these different verticals and things that it can do. They had a bot that was basically a therapist for addiction, from a company that's managing addictions. And so the bots had to be trained on how to talk to somebody when they call in, whether it's, drugs, alcohol, suicide, those kinds of things, and had to be trained to have a conversation with the person until they could get the real therapist on the phone. Right. So it's crazy stuff. And I think that's going to be a huge disruptor to going forward. I think people are still confused right now. Chat GPT and Claude and they all pop into everybody's head.
Sure.
But they're great tools, but it's not Terminator stuff.
Yeah. That's nothing about. I am far from deeply well versed in AI, but I have some friends and clients who are like really, really in, and some of the stuff that they've explained to me or told me, in terms of even just existing capacity, not to mention what is anticipated not too far into the future, was fascinating and scary. But yeah, interesting. Yeah. And listen, this conversation of disruption is always huge for business survival and for deals as well. And sometimes triggers deals, right? Whether it's somebody who's not kept up, or maybe somebody who is on the cutting edge of stuff, and then a bigger company, acquires them to be able to apply their solutions, their knowledge, maybe their new AI way of doing X, Y, Z across their organization. So that happens sometimes as well, and can be a driver of M&A as well, or joint ventures or strategic alliances or other types of deals.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get to my final two questions, is there anything else that you're seeing, whether it's in the deal market or in terms of what you do with your clients, or anything that we haven't covered?
No, I mean, I think, as far as what I do, I know that I've been talking to a lot of VCs and some brokers on the other side, and it's starting to pick up. They're starting to see more deal flow, and so they're all getting excited. But I have one guy I deal with, a VC, and I mean, his mailbox is always full. I can hardly ever find him. I have to text him all the time just to try to have a conversation with him. He's like a chicken with his head cut off, but he's seeing a lot of activity. And the brokers, same thing. They're saying, you got a lot of boomers out there now trying to, hey, I'm done. I want to get out while I still can. And then, and they're all over the place as far as size of businesses, but it certainly seems like it's picking up now, given the current economic and political environment and things like that. Whether people are going to pull back, I hope not, but there's that possibility for a while.
Yeah. I mean, listen, one of the things that I was going to do a little video on this or whatever, whatever your political leanings are, whatever you believe on policy or not policy, the one thing that is no question universally true, no matter who you think might be causing it, not causing it over history, is that whether it's the stock market, whether it's the deal market, whether it's entrepreneurs in general, business leaders in general, uncertainty, right? Whatever it's caused by, sometimes a lot of times actually has people wait and see, right? I say that, listen, the ideal scenario is that whatever we believe the policy should be is the policy. The second best scenario actually is that a policy we disagree with is in place, but it's clear. What entrepreneurs are great at is, if we know the game plan, if we know the rules, if we know the guidelines, if we know what the playing field is, right? We play it. Now, we prefer the playing field to be more favorable to whatever would be good for us. But even if it's bad, as long as we know what it is, okay, now we know what we're dealing with. What slows things down is uncertainty. So it will be interesting to see whether the current uncertainty in various areas is short-term, or whether that, will have long-term impacts. But yeah, uncertainty is not good for business, no matter who is causing it or what is causing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Angelo, if people want to find out more about what you do, whether it's related to the deal and M&A or capital raising space, or whether it's just your, obviously your general CMO and marketing services, where should they go?
LinkedIn is a good way to get to my website, but on my website, I actually have a variety of free tools and videos, but I also have a section on there is how I get involved in, whether it's, VC, PE, or dealing with businesses. So I added that earlier last year, as I kind of moved into this space, it's like, I'm going to play in it, then I need to really support it and push it. And like I said, when we talked before, I'm doing a lot of seminars and webinars and getting myself out there. And I belong to a bunch of networking groups, and there's a bunch of affinity groups on M&A. So I'm going to those. And so really working it pretty hard, and I'm getting good feedback and opportunities because again, the same reaction you had, right? Is like, it makes sense. People don't think about it, but it makes perfect sense. The hard part is get him to understand I'm not talking about tactics, right? And because they want to go there because of the word marketing in my title.
Yeah, it's strategy. And what's the actual website?
I'm going to change the URL, but it's called Craft Marketing and Branding.
Great. Angelo, my final question of the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
I'm going to probably go along the lines with you. It's the ability to make choices to do what I need to do when I want to do it. I have 3 boys, and I can honestly say, when they were growing up, between them, I can count on my hands, both hands, how many times I've missed one of their baseball or lacrosse or whatever game. That was number one, even when I wasn't an entrepreneur. And this company is 11 years old and literally a month, but I've done this before. Matter of fact, my very first business was a film company, which failed miserably, but it was a great learning lesson. But when I was 7 years later, I went back and I did it again. And that's when I grew the agency. But having that ability to make a decision to go see the family or go play some music in the middle of the day or whatever I want to do, it's up to me. As I said, somebody said to me one time, well, you got all this freedom. I go, yeah, I have the freedom to choose whether I work today, tonight, or Saturday or Sunday, but that's my choice.
Right. Exactly. It's not like you can sit around and do nothing and have money flow in, but yes, when, exactly how, where, all that.
That's my choice. Yeah, that's my freedom.
Love it. Angelo, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Yeah, Corey, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.